Okay, we're going to skip ahead a little bit and then I'll backtrack and cover what actually was discussed in between. But I used a Proline 4500 resin and I injected it into the motor tube here in between the body tube and the motor tube. I started injecting with it upright right above the centering, the front forward centering ring. And I had to go in really, really slow because I didn't want it to flow into the motor tube. And it didn't take long to decide that there was just no way I was going to get it to spread around there without it going up and over the motor tube, so I stopped that. I then drilled holes uh, forward and uh, right behind the forward centering ring, in front of the rear centering ring, and I injected into there. The intent was again that it would flow around because I left some gap in front and back. I was hoping it would flow around and seal the areas. It actually didn't flow very well from one side to the other. There wasn't enough of a gap. By the time it's done, I just drilled a hole in every place, injected in every place. You can see I didn't quite fill it all the way down there. It was a little challenge going right over the Kevlar shock cord. It was hard to inject, but it did get in there. I do have plenty enough in here attaching the motor tube to the body tube, so I'm fully confident that regardless of fin tab strength, there's enough epoxy there holding the two tubes together that it'll transfer the motor thrust to the body tube and on up from there. So it came out a little rough right now. It might have to be one of the rockets I actually paint, but that's the situation right now. I'll go back in next. I'll do fillets and I'll also fill in those holes and sand them a little bit so at least they are not holes. The other nice thing about having the epoxy fill in here is I can do my rail buttons and know that I'm drilling pretty much into solid epoxy in those places. So I probably can't do it in the place where the shock cord is, but this actually looks like a nice place for two rail buttons. So anyhow, that's the current state. I'll go ahead and let you watch the discussions and the steps up to here on the end of the rest of this video. And then I'll pick up back with probably finishing up the fillets and then talking about the ab bay. I did measure it, do some sims, decided I did need a little bit of nose cone weight up in here. So I put some BBs along with a Proline 4500 resin and dumped it down in there. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it in there, but it's basically down in the bottom of the nose cone. And it's got that threaded insert in there. We'll be putting the threaded ab bay in later. So that's current status. We'll see where we're at in a little bit. Okay, the motor tube is tacked in with 5-minute epoxy. We're going to do a quick tack in of all the fins with 5-minute epoxy. And then eventually we're going to fill enough of the space between the 54 and the 65 with some epoxy to actually bond the two tubes together and not really rely much on the fins to carry the weight. So we're just going to do this here real quick. We can move on to doing our fillets, and then eventually we'll come back to putting epoxy actually in the body tube itself, in between the motor tube in there. We'll inject it in. We'll probably use the Wildman or Proline, whatever it is, 4500. I think it'll be runny enough that it'll distribute around, and then we can go from there. So I have done that before, where you pour it in where you can't get to it, and technically then you're really just bonding that motor tube to the outer tube, irregardless of whether the fins are doing any work for transferring that thrust. So this will let me get on to the other parts of the rocket that I need to work on before the launch tomorrow. So we're going to put that in there. We're going to slide this down. There's a little epoxy relief so it doesn't epoxy them in. And we should be, now I want these forward. Again, there's a little bit of space between that and the ring, and space between the back of the ring to make it so that the epoxy can flow around there. So we'll come back to it in a little bit. Okay, so the 5-minute epoxy has set on these fins. I did realize or consider while it was sitting there that this gap back here that I want to have so the sealing epoxy flows around on the inside
is a problem if I do the fillets first, because they will flow through there and probably block the area that I want the epoxy to flow around. So I may change the order and do the injection first, and using tape and or something else to keep it from oozing out there. But I think I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the inner fill, at least in a couple places. So we'll see how that goes. I'll come back to you to this after I know. Okay, so a couple steps since the last frame, whatever. Went ahead and epoxied on the Aeropack retainer on the bottom there with some JV Weld. Made sure, mostly to be sure that space between the body tube and the centering ring were actually filled. There actually was one place where I could stick a piece of paper up through there, and runny epoxy has a place of going through cracks tiny enough that you think it would never go there, but it does, and then it would have gotten epoxy on my motor tube and possibly made it impossible to use. So I drilled 2 holes here, one down here, so I'm going to try to set it upright and fill the bottom part and then the part above the top centering ring here, and then if I still feel it needs more, I'll flip it over and put another one and fill around the top there. Size the holes basically so it fits the syringe. ChatGPT says about 12 cc's of epoxy will do about a ½ inch around the tube. That seems small, but I'm just going to put it in slowly and see how it goes. Up here I got to be sure I don't push it in too fast. I'll have it upright, but so that it overflows and goes into the motor tube, or I'll have a display model and not a flying model. So I'm going to go ahead and try that next. I'll let you know how that goes. Okay, this is probably the ugliest rocket I've ever made. Let's talk about epoxy here, so filling it in. So the Proline 4500 is really too thick to try to do that with, because if you start to inject it, I started to inject it above the top centering ring here, and it made it to within a ¼ inch of spill going over the top and into the motor tube. So I was going very, very slowly, but very little of it was spreading out. It was mostly just going there, and it would have gone over had I kept it up. So then I moved to the bottom. It was successful there. It did spread out. It didn't go past the end of the fins like I had hoped. So by the time it was done, I just drilled 1 hole per side. Of course, the hole right over the Kevlar strap cord was a little hard to inject into, but it did inject. Then realized, figuring, okay, well, this isn't going to work above here, above the centering ring, so I came back below the centering ring, drilled 3 more holes, and injected some more. This rocket will have to be painted before it should ever show its face, but I'm still probably going to fly it tomorrow anyway. So I can say that given the quantity of Proline stuck between the body tube and the motor tube there, they will travel as one. The fins are not doing anything as far as strength there, so I'm going to let all that stuff harden for an hour or so, and then probably start working on fillets, which is where I wanted to be at this point anyway. So it should still be able to fly tomorrow. Fillets and basically rail buttons, and then I'll be using this nose cone, which has the integrated av bay in it, so just as a screw-in av bay. I don't know if you've seen it in the earlier videos, but example there. So that just screws into there. E-matches come out the bottom. So I'll do head-end deployment with a cable cutter on the main. So, but it will fly ugly tomorrow, so I'll have to think of an appropriate name for it. So that's it for now. I'll keep coming back. Maybe I'll do some fillet stuff, although everybody knows how to do fillets, but we'll talk more later.